The 2025 Los Angeles wildfires devastated countless homes, leaving a trail of destruction across some of the wealthiest neighborhoods. Yet, even among the most affluent victims, stories emerged of shocking inequities in disaster response. 15 Black celebrities reported being denied timely assistance from firefighting services, leading to the total loss of their homes. These incidents raise urgent questions about systemic racism and its pervasive impact, even in life-or-death emergencies. The following are the heartbreaking accounts of these prominent figures, highlighting their losses, resilience, and calls for justice in the wake of an unprecedented crisis. Oprah Winfrey suffered the devastating loss of her Montecito estate during the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires, a home that held immense personal and professional significance. Known for its sprawling beauty and serene surroundings, the property was more than just a residence. It was a testament to her journey and success. As the flames approached, Oprah reportedly made repeated pleas for assistance from local firefighting services, only to face delays and, ultimately, no significant effort to save her property. Despite having the resources to secure private firefighters, she encountered barriers that highlighted systemic inequities in emergency response. The loss of the estate was a deeply emotional experience for Oprah, who expressed her heartbreak not just for herself, but for the countless families impacted by the fires. Her reflections went beyond personal grief, as she publicly questioned why some properties appeared prioritized over others, even when those affected had the means to advocate for themselves. Oprah's experience sparked discussions about racial bias in disaster response, emphasizing that inequities persist even for affluent individuals in marginalized communities. Following the tragedy, Oprah channeled her pain into advocacy, using her platform to highlight the need for equity in emergency management. She donated significant resources to support communities disproportionately affected by the wildfires, focusing on providing aid to underrepresented groups. Oprah also initiated conversations with local officials to push for systemic reforms that would ensure fair allocation of emergency resources in future disasters. Her resilience and determination to address these injustices have inspired others to take action, making her story one of both profound loss and unwavering commitment to justice. Oprah's efforts remind the world that even in tragedy, she remains a voice for change and equality. Tyler Perry faced the devastating destruction of his Beverly Hills property during the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires, a loss that highlighted the challenges even prominent figures face during such disasters. The luxurious property, a reflection of Perry's hard-earned success, was reduced to ashes as flames engulfed the area. Despite his repeated calls for assistance, Perry encountered delays in response times, further compounding the devastation. Reports of firefighting resources being diverted to other properties raised questions about the fairness and equity of emergency management. In the aftermath, Perry made public statements about the emotional and logistical challenges of seeking help and rebuilding after such a catastrophic loss. He spoke candidly about the frustration of navigating the recovery process, even as a person of means, and the importance of addressing systemic barriers that can leave certain communities feeling overlooked. His remarks underscored that wealth does not necessarily shield individuals from the impacts of bias, particularly when it comes to decisions about resource allocation during emergencies. Rather than allowing the experience to silence him, Perry used his platform to advocate for change. He donated significant resources to organizations assisting families displaced by the wildfires, with a focus on supporting underrepresented communities. He also partnered with local leaders to call for reforms in emergency management, emphasizing the need for equitable treatment regardless of race or socioeconomic status. Perry's efforts have sparked conversations about systemic inequalities in disaster response, encouraging both public and private entities to reevaluate their protocols. Through his resilience and advocacy, Tyler Perry turned personal tragedy into an opportunity to shine a light on the broader issues of equity and justice, reminding the world of the urgent need for systemic reform in times of crisis. Beyoncé and Jay-Z experienced the devastating loss of their sprawling Calabasas property during the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires, a home that had served as both a family retreat and a testament to their monumental success. Despite the immense value of the estate and their repeated calls for assistance, reports surfaced of delays in emergency response. The couple struggled to secure timely firefighting support as the flames approached, with accounts suggesting that resources were allocated elsewhere despite their pleas. This experience highlighted systemic disparities in how emergency services were distributed, raising concerns about bias even in affluent communities. The emotional impact of losing their home was compounded by the frustration of feeling overlooked during such a critical moment. Bianchi and Jay-Z shared their reflections on the tragedy, emphasizing the importance of fair treatment for all individuals during crisis. Their statements resonated widely, drawing attention to the broader issues of inequity in disaster response. Despite their loss, they chose to focus on rebuilding and helping others who faced even greater challenges. In the aftermath, the power couple channeled their resources into relief efforts, specifically targeting underprivileged communities that were disproportionately affected by the wildfires. They made significant donations to organizations providing immediate assistance, including temporary housing, food, and supplies for displaced families. Additionally, they launched initiatives to support long-term rebuilding efforts in marginalized areas, ensuring that those without access to substantial resources could recover. Bianchi and Jay-Z's response to the wildfires demonstrated their resilience and commitment to making a difference. By turning their personal tragedy into an opportunity for advocacy and philanthropy, they underscored the importance of equity in recovery and inspired meaningful conversations about systemic change in emergency management. Their actions remain a beacon of hope and solidarity in the wake of the disaster. LeBron James faced the heartbreaking destruction of his Brentwood mansion during the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires, a home that symbolized years of hard work and dedication to his craft. Forced to evacuate with his family as flames rapidly approached, James described the chaos and urgency of leaving behind cherished belongings. Despite his resources and repeated calls for assistance, the emergency response was insufficient and delayed, leaving his property vulnerable to the fire's full force. James later spoke out about the frustration of feeling deprioritized during the crisis, even in an affluent neighborhood. He highlighted the systemic inequities in disaster response that can leave certain individuals and communities underserved, regardless of their socioeconomic status. His experiences shed light on the challenges faced by marginalized groups in accessing timely and effective support during emergencies. In the aftermath, LeBron used his platform to advocate for racial justice and equitable disaster relief, emphasizing the need for systemic reforms to ensure fair treatment for all. Through social media and public appearances, he called attention to the broader implications of inequity in emergency management, urging policymakers and organizations to address the underlying biases that exacerbate such disparities. LeBron also took action to support others affected by the wildfires, contributing significant resources to relief efforts and partnering with local organizations to assist displaced families. His initiatives prioritized underrepresented communities that often lack the resources to recover from such disasters. Through his advocacy and philanthropy, LeBron James turned personal loss into a powerful call for change. His efforts to raise awareness and push for equitable disaster management reflect his commitment to justice and his belief in the importance of standing together in times of crisis. His voice remains a beacon of hope for those seeking fairness and reform. Serena Williams endured the devastating loss of her Los Angeles home during the 2025 wildfires, a property that held deep personal significance for her and her family. The flames spread rapidly through her neighborhood, leaving little time for preparation or defense. Despite multiple calls for help, reports indicated that her home was deprioritized by emergency responders, a frustrating reality that left her feeling powerless. Witnessing the destruction and knowing more could have been done added an emotional layer to an already harrowing experience. Serena later reflected on the challenges of facing such a crisis, emphasizing the importance of resilience in the face of loss. As a mother and a global icon, she found strength in her family, particularly her husband and young daughter, who provided comfort during this difficult time. Serena shared candidly about the difficulty of explaining the situation to her child, choosing to focus on gratitude for their safety and the ability to start anew. Rather than dwelling on the inequities she faced, Serena used her experience to inspire others. She shared messages about perseverance and the importance of leaning on loved ones during challenging times. Her story resonated with fans and highlighted the universal vulnerability experienced during natural disasters, regardless of fame or fortune. In addition to her reflections, Serena contributed to relief efforts for those affected by the wildfires, particularly families without the resources to recover quickly. Her donations and advocacy focused on creating support systems for displaced individuals, emphasizing the importance of unity in rebuilding communities. Serena's journey through this tragedy showcased her characteristic strength and determination. Her ability to find hope in the aftermath and advocate for others serves as a testament to her resilience and her commitment to making a difference. Kerry Washington faced significant damage to her Malibu residence during the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires, an event that took a profound emotional toll. The property, filled with cherished belongings and personal mementos from her career and family life, was left unrecognizable after the flames subsided. Items with deep sentimental value, such as family photographs and gifts from loved ones, were irretrievably lost. Washington shared how the experience of seeing her home damaged by the wildfires was both heartbreaking and disorienting, leaving her grappling with the sudden upheaval of a space that had been her sanctuary. In the wake of the destruction, Washington became an outspoken advocate for systemic changes in emergency management. She emphasized that the allocation of firefighting resources during disasters needs to be fair and equitable, regardless of location or perceived priority. Her personal experience underscored the broader issues of bias in disaster response, inspiring her to use her platform to bring these inequities to light. Washington highlighted the need for increased funding and training for first responders, ensuring they have the tools and guidance to protect all communities effectively. She also called for the development of transparent policies to prioritize resources based on need rather than socioeconomic factors. Through interviews and social media, Washington shared her story not only to reflect on her loss, but also to spark a broader conversation about fairness in crisis management. Her resilience in the face of such adversity inspired many, and her advocacy efforts continue to push for meaningful reforms that could prevent similar experiences for others. Kerry Washington's ability to transform personal tragedy into a rallying cry for systemic change showcases her dedication to justice and her commitment to creating a better future for all. Diddy, Sean Combs, suffered the devastating destruction of his Hollywood Hills estate during the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires. The luxurious property, which symbolized years of hard work and personal achievement, was completely consumed by the flames despite his efforts to secure assistance. The estate housed not only personal mementos, but also valuable items tied to his music and business legacy, making its loss deeply emotional and symbolic of a broader issue he later addressed publicly. In the aftermath, Diddy spoke out about the inequities he experienced during the disaster. He criticized what he described as a biased response system, pointing to reports that some properties in neighboring areas received prioritized attention, while his calls for help were delayed or went unanswered. Diddy emphasized that such disparities reflect deeper systemic issues, particularly when it comes to disaster management for marginalized communities. Using his platform, Diddy shed light on how these inequities affect not only everyday individuals, but also prominent figures like himself, demonstrating that wealth does not shield Black homeowners from systemic bias. His outspoken criticism sparked conversations about how racial inequities persist in emergency situations, where resource allocation can sometimes reflect societal disparities. Diddy also directed his focus toward solutions, calling for transparency in emergency response protocols and advocating for increased accountability in how resources are distributed. He encouraged officials to address these shortcomings to ensure fair treatment for all during future disasters. Though the loss of his estate was a personal tragedy, Diddy's willingness to speak out turned it into an opportunity for advocacy. His voice amplified the conversation about systemic inequities, pushing for meaningful reforms that could create a more just and equitable approach to disaster management in the future. John Legend and Chrissy Teigen faced the heartbreaking loss of their Beverly Hills home during the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires. The property, a sanctuary where they had built countless memories with their children, was reduced to ash as flames tore through the area. Despite making repeated calls for assistance, the couple experienced significant delays in response times from emergency services. Their frustrations mounted as they watched nearby properties receive quicker attention, leaving them feeling helpless as the fire consumed their cherished home. The emotional toll of losing their home was compounded by the sense of inequity they experienced during the disaster. Chrissy openly shared on social media about the difficulty of explaining the loss to their young children, while John spoke about the surreal feeling of losing everything despite having the resources to rebuild. Their candid reflections resonated with fans, highlighting the vulnerability felt by so many families during the wildfires. In the aftermath, the couple turned their grief into action by supporting communities affected by the fires. They made significant financial contributions to local relief efforts, focusing on providing immediate aid to displaced families. John and Chrissy also partnered with grassroots organizations to distribute food, clothing, and temporary shelter to those in need. In addition to their philanthropy, they used their platforms to raise awareness about the inequities in disaster response, urging systemic reforms to ensure fair and timely assistance for all. Their efforts emphasize the importance of community resilience and solidarity during times of crisis. John Legend and Chrissy Teigen's response to their loss showcased their compassion and commitment to helping others. By turning personal tragedy into an opportunity for advocacy and support, they inspired hope and underscored the power of unity in overcoming hardship. Michael B. Jordan experienced the devastating loss of his first major home during the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires, a property that marked a significant milestone in his career and personal life. The flames engulfed the residence, leaving nothing but ash and debris behind. The home, a symbol of his success and hard work, was not just a place of comfort, but a reminder of his journey from aspiring actor to Hollywood superstar. The tragedy highlighted systemic challenges faced by Black homeowners, even in affluent neighborhoods. Jordan shared his frustration about the delayed emergency response, recounting how repeated calls for help were met with insufficient action. He reflected on the inequities in disaster management, emphasizing that systemic biases often lead to unequal resource allocation, disproportionately affecting marginalized groups. Despite his status and wealth, he found himself grappling with the same challenges many Black homeowners face, underscoring how systemic issues transcend socioeconomic boundaries. Jordan's reflections extended to the broader impact of these disparities, urging policymakers to address the biases that persist in emergency protocols. He emphasized the need for greater accountability and transparency in how resources are distributed during crisis. In the aftermath, Jordan focused on resilience and rebuilding, turning his personal loss into an opportunity to advocate for change. He partnered with organizations to support families displaced by the wildfires, prioritizing communities often overlooked in disaster recovery efforts. His donations and public statements brought attention to the urgent need for equitable solutions in emergency management. Through his advocacy, Michael B. Jordan not only confronted the systemic challenges exposed by his loss, but also became a voice for reform. His ability to turn tragedy into a platform for change highlighted his commitment to justice and inspired others to push for a more equitable future. Ava DuVernay faced the heartbreaking loss of her Los Angeles home during the 2025 wildfires, a sanctuary that had been both a personal retreat and a creative hub. As flames approached her neighborhood, DuVernay encountered unique challenges during the evacuation process, including delayed notifications and overcrowded evacuation routes. The chaotic experience left her with little time to gather personal belongings, forcing her to leave behind sentimental items and valuable materials related to her work. The destruction of her home was not just a personal loss, but also a disruption to her creative process and a deeply emotional event. In the aftermath, DuVernay reflected on the systemic disparities that influenced her evacuation experience. She highlighted how marginalized communities, even in affluent areas, often face unequal access to timely emergency resources. These reflections became a focal point of her public advocacy, as she used her platform to amplify discussions about inequities in disaster response and resource allocation. Her personal experiences also informed her future storytelling, inspiring her to explore themes of resilience, systemic bias, and community solidarity in her projects. DuVernay spoke openly about how the fire exposed vulnerabilities that exist across socioeconomic lines and how these issues disproportionately affect people of color. Her commitment to addressing these challenges translated into both activism and art, as she sought to bring greater awareness to the intersection of race, privilege, and disaster management. DuVernay also contributed to relief efforts, supporting organizations focused on helping underrepresented communities rebuild after the fires. Her advocacy extended to pushing for systemic reforms in emergency management, ensuring that future responses are equitable and inclusive. Through her resilience and dedication, Ava DuVernay turned personal tragedy into an opportunity to inspire change and create impactful narratives that resonate with audiences worldwide. Issa Rae experienced significant damage to her family's property in South Los Angeles during the 2025 wildfires, a devastating event that highlighted the vulnerability of communities often overlooked in disaster response efforts. The property, a meaningful connection to her roots and family history, suffered extensive losses as the fires spread rapidly. While emergency services responded to more affluent areas, Rae noted delays in assistance for neighborhoods like hers, raising questions about how resources are allocated in times of crisis. The emotional toll of witnessing the damage to her family's home left Rae reflecting on the broader challenges faced by underrepresented communities during natural disasters. She spoke openly about the systemic inequities in disaster preparedness and response, pointing out that communities of color often lack access to the resources needed to effectively prevent and recover from such events. Her experience reinforced her belief in the importance of inclusive planning that addresses the needs of all neighborhoods, not just those with higher visibility or wealth. In the aftermath, Rae turned her attention to advocacy, using her platform to push for more equitable disaster preparedness programs. She emphasized the need for community-based solutions, such as improved emergency education, better communication systems, and equitable resource distribution. Rae collaborated with local organizations to raise awareness and funding for these initiatives, ensuring that underserved communities have the tools to protect themselves in future crises. Her efforts also included public campaigns aimed at holding policymakers accountable for creating fairer systems. By amplifying these issues, Rae shed light on the intersection of race, class, and disaster management. Issa Rae's commitment to addressing these disparities demonstrates her dedication to fostering resilience and equity, proving that even in the face of personal loss, she remains a powerful advocate for change. The Wheat-born Abel Tesfaye faced the heartbreaking destruction of his Hollywood Hills estate during the 2025 wildfires. The luxurious property, a symbol of his remarkable journey from humble beginnings to global stardom, was reduced to ash as flames swept through the area. Despite his efforts to secure emergency assistance, reports indicated delayed responses from firefighting services, leaving his home vulnerable to the fire's devastation. Among the losses were cherished personal items, creative materials, and memorabilia tied to his career, making the tragedy deeply emotional. In the aftermath, Tesfaye spoke publicly about the emotional toll of losing his home, describing the experience as surreal and deeply unsettling. He reflected on the fragility of material possessions and the profound sense of helplessness he felt during the disaster. His statements highlighted how even those with significant resources are not immune to the challenges posed by systemic inequities in disaster response. Tesfaye emphasized that the delays in emergency services raised questions about the fairness of resource allocation, particularly in diverse communities. Turning his loss into a call for action, the Wheat used his platform to amplify awareness about the inequities in disaster management. He called for greater accountability and systemic reforms to ensure fair treatment for all communities, regardless of race or socioeconomic status. In addition to his advocacy, Tesfaye made significant financial contributions to wildfire relief efforts, prioritizing support for families displaced by the fires. Through his resilience and willingness to address uncomfortable truths, the Wheat transformed his personal tragedy into an opportunity to inspire change. His voice has become a powerful force in the conversation about equity and disaster preparedness, ensuring that his experience contributes to a broader movement for systemic justice and inclusivity. Dr. Dre faced the devastating loss of his Calabasas mansion during the 2025 wildfires, a property that represented decades of hard work, success, and personal achievement. The estate, known for its sprawling luxury and custom features, was destroyed as the flames swept through the area. Despite his attempts to secure assistance, the delayed emergency response left his home vulnerable, resulting in the loss of irreplaceable personal items, memorabilia, and pieces of his professional legacy. The experience had a profound impact on Dr. Dre, reshaping his views on wealth, race, and the disparities in disaster response. He spoke candidly about how the wildfires revealed systemic issues that persist even for individuals with significant resources. Dre noted how racial bias can influence emergency services, with certain areas receiving prioritized attention while others, including his neighborhood, were overlooked. He emphasized that wealth did not shield him from the inequities that marginalized communities face, demonstrating how deeply rooted systemic challenges extend across societal lines. Dre's reflections focused on the importance of addressing these disparities, calling for reforms in how disaster resources are allocated and managed. He highlighted the need for transparent protocols to ensure that all communities, regardless of demographics, are given equal consideration during crisis. In response to his loss, Dr. Dre contributed to wildfire relief efforts, donating funds to assist displaced families and rebuild affected areas. He also used his platform to advocate for systemic changes in disaster preparedness and response, encouraging conversations about equity and accountability. Dr. Dre's journey through this tragedy underscored his resilience and determination to turn personal loss into meaningful action. His commitment to addressing inequities in disaster response reflects his broader dedication to justice and community support. Lupita Nyong'o experienced the devastating loss of her Los Angeles home during the 2025 wildfires, a tragedy compounded by the chaos of a last-minute evacuation. As flames closed in on her neighborhood, she had little time to gather belongings, leaving behind treasured items tied to her family and career. Despite her efforts to secure help, Lupita faced delays in emergency response, and her home was ultimately consumed by the fire. The experience was deeply emotional, leaving her to reflect on the challenges of rebuilding and the inequities in disaster response. In the aftermath, Lupita spoke openly about systemic discrimination in emergency management, emphasizing how biases can impact the prioritization of resources. She highlighted the disproportionate effects on marginalized communities, even in affluent areas, and how these issues persist regardless of wealth or status. Her reflections underscored the need for greater transparency and accountability in how disaster resources are allocated, calling attention to the structural barriers that leave certain groups more vulnerable. Lupita turned her focus to advocacy and action, joining efforts to support equitable disaster preparedness and recovery programs. She partnered with organizations that assist underrepresented communities in rebuilding, ensuring that displaced families receive the aid and resources they need. Her efforts extended to fundraising for wildfire relief and pushing for systemic reforms in emergency response protocols to ensure fairness for all. Through her resilience and advocacy, Lupita demonstrated the power of transforming personal tragedy into a force for positive change. Her ability to address uncomfortable truths about systemic discrimination, while championing inclusive recovery efforts, has made her a prominent voice in the fight for equity. Lupita's story of loss and determination continues to inspire others to push for a fairer, more just approach to disaster management. Throughout history, disaster relief has often exposed deep-seated inequities in how resources are distributed and communities are supported. From Hurricane Katrina in 2005 to the wildfires that ravaged California in 2025, marginalized groups, particularly Black communities, have frequently been deprioritized during times of crisis. In the case of Hurricane Katrina, predominantly Black neighborhoods were left to fend for themselves as delayed evacuations. Insufficient rescue efforts and inadequate rebuilding plans disproportionately affected residents. These patterns are not isolated, but part of a systemic issue where racial bias influences how disasters are managed. In wildfires, as seen in the 2025 Los Angeles fires, resource allocation often appears skewed, with emergency responses favoring affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods. Marginalized communities, even those with significant financial resources, frequently report delayed responses or inadequate firefighting efforts. These disparities are not solely logistical. They stem from systemic biases that prioritize certain demographics over others. Evacuation plans, emergency notifications, and resource distribution are often less effective in areas predominantly inhabited by people of color. This inequity in response leaves Black families and communities more vulnerable to the devastation of natural disasters and hinders their recovery efforts. Systemic racial bias does not disappear in affluent spaces. It simply takes different forms. For Black celebrities who lost their homes in the 2025 wildfires, the challenges they faced highlight how racism transcends socioeconomic status. Despite their wealth and public influence, figures like Oprah Winfrey and LeBron James reported delayed emergency services, raising questions about how race continues to shape the priorities of disaster response. Black celebrities often confront a double standard. While their affluence grants them visibility, it does not protect them from biases ingrained in systems designed to favor certain communities. This is evident in the allocation of firefighting resources, where affluent Black neighborhoods may still be deprioritized compared to similarly affluent white areas. The intersection of race and wealth presents unique obstacles. Public perceptions often assume that affluent Black individuals are immune to systemic racism, but the reality is far more complex. Wealth does not negate the impact of implicit biases or structural inequalities. For instance, Black homeowners frequently face higher scrutiny when advocating for resources, and their concerns may be dismissed as less urgent. This dynamic creates an additional layer of vulnerability, as it becomes clear that even those with means can be left unsupported in critical moments. The stories of Black celebrities losing their homes highlight the broader issue of how racial inequity pervades disaster management. These incidents demonstrate the urgent need for systemic reforms to address biases in emergency services, ensuring that all individuals receive equal care and support, regardless of their race or economic status. By examining these challenges, society can move closer to creating a more equitable framework for disaster preparedness and response. In the wake of the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires, many Black celebrities who lost their homes have turned their personal tragedies into opportunities for advocacy, using their platforms to demand equity in disaster management. Figures like Oprah Winfrey, LeBron James, and Ava DuVernay have spoken openly about the systemic biases that influence resource allocation and emergency responses, emphasizing the need for reforms that prioritize fairness and inclusivity. Their public statements have called for greater transparency in how firefighting resources are distributed and how evacuation protocols are implemented to ensure that marginalized communities are not overlooked. These celebrities have also engaged in significant fundraising efforts to support disaster relief and recovery. For example, Beyoncé and Jay-Z contributed millions to organizations focused on assisting displaced families, with a particular emphasis on helping underprivileged communities rebuild. Similarly, The Weeknd has donated substantial funds to wildfire relief programs, leveraging his global platform to draw attention to the disparities in disaster response. Many of these figures have also partnered with nonprofit organizations to launch campaigns aimed at addressing systemic issues in emergency management, advocating for policy changes at both local and national levels. Beyond their individual advocacy, Black celebrities have collaborated to provide direct support to communities affected by the wildfires, emphasizing solidarity and shared responsibility. Tyler Perry has been instrumental in organizing relief efforts, using his resources to supply temporary housing and essential supplies for displaced families. Serena Williams and Issa Rae have focused on supporting grassroots organizations that work within underrepresented neighborhoods to ensure that aid reaches those who need it most. These collaborative efforts reflect a broader commitment to community resilience and the belief that no one should face the aftermath of a disaster alone. Several celebrities have also launched initiatives aimed at improving disaster preparedness for underrepresented groups. For instance, Kerry Washington has worked to develop educational programs that teach families how to create emergency plans and advocate for equitable resource distribution. Lupita Nyong'o has partnered with community leaders to establish recovery programs that prioritize housing and mental health services for displaced residents. These initiatives recognize that recovery is not just about rebuilding homes, but also about restoring a sense of security and stability within vulnerable communities. Through their advocacy and community support, These celebrities are not only addressing the immediate impacts of the wildfires, but also paving the way for systemic changes that will benefit future generations. Their efforts highlight the importance of resilience, solidarity, and the power of using personal loss as a catalyst for meaningful action. By standing together, they are challenging the inequities in disaster management and inspiring others to join the fight for a more just and inclusive future.